pretty soon. So Vagrant up, Vagrant SSH into your machine. Start the Rails server, Rails server-b 0.0.0.0. That should become very familiar to you guys. And get your Sublime open and open up your website code. Okay. Again, pretty much from here on in, every lecture that we do, make sure that's kind of up and running before we start the lecture, because most of the lectures going forward now, we're going to start the coding pretty soon. The theory that we talk about is kind of interlaced with the code that we're going to do. Okay. Okay, we've come a long way. We've done a lot. Okay, we talked about web and what web is all about. It's all about request and response. Awesome. That's a very enthusiastic response. Okay, request and response. Okay, we talked about that's how the Web 2.0 worked. Then web in general. Then we talked about Web 2.0 and how we said that the idea is that it's kind of stupid for humans to always code that response back. Why don't we use code to generate that response? Okay. And while we're using that code to generate the response, we can also do anything we want on the server. This is Web 2.0, right? Client-side code and server-side code. So we covered that. Then we dove into Rails routing and how Rails specifically does this request and response action, right? So the very first thing when a request comes into the Rails environment, what's the very first thing it hits? Routes, right? After routes, what does a route tell you to go to? Controller and?
Model.
Close. I mean, I'm kind of asking the maybe question a little vaguely. It goes to a method on the controller called a, what do we call methods on controllers? Actions. Okay. So the route tells you to go to a controller and action. Then it can optionally deal with a model. And then it ultimately has to return a response. And we use view templates to return that response. Okay. We specifically use a method called render to create that response and send it back to the browser. Okay. Then last week, we took a little bit of a sidetrack. We started focusing just on the model because we're going to use the model in that Rails routing structure. But there's a lot of stuff dealing with models that we had to have a whole separate lecture just dealing with it on the side. Okay, so we coded the model. All right, and the model consisted of a Ruby class, but also what did it consist of? Two parts. Database, exactly. Database table. Okay, so we coded that, and then we were able to play around with the model and save it to the database and read from the database and all that stuff. Okay, today we are going to bring it all together. Okay, we're going to bring the model and throw it into that Rails routing, and then you're going to pretty much understand over the next couple of weeks pretty much how all Rails applications work and how they're structured. Okay. Yes, okay, so let's just dive a little bit into the theory. So today, we are going to talk about RESTful resources. How many people in the room have ever heard the term REST before? Okay, how many people could tell me what REST means? Yeah, me neither, to be honest. REST is a very complex definition, to be honest. You can read a lot about it. I tried to read a lot about it, and I kind of understand the gist of it, but it doesn't really matter the formal academic definition of REST. Okay, we're going to treat it in a certain way when we talk about our Rails RESTful resources, okay? So for our intents and purposes in this class and in your Rails development, okay, a RESTful resource is basically a data entity that you can interact with in a standard set of ways using standard HTTP protocols and URLs. That is a mouthful. Okay, let's look at that for a second. For our intents and purposes, a RESTful resource is a data entity. So a data entity means when you're modeling your problem, your software problem, right? The client comes up to you and say, I need an e-commerce store that sells products. You're going to create a product model, right? That product is a data entity. Okay, that's what I mean by data entity here. Okay, so a RESTful resource are those things that you're modeling in your system. Okay, so a product is your data entity that can be interacted with in standard ways. In other words, I should be able to interact with a product in a standard set of ways. Those standard set of ways, I should be able to create a product. I should be able to read a product. I should be able to update a product. I should be able to destroy a product. Has anybody in the room ever heard of the acronym CRUD? Okay, that's what CRUD actions are. Create, read, update, destroy. The basic things you would ever do with a data entity in a software system. Right? You're always creating products, destroying products, updating them, or reading them. Okay? Interact with standard ways. Using standard HTTP protocols and URLs. Okay? Remember we talked about web requests way back in the first lecture, and how web requests, there's a bunch of characteristics about web requests. One of them is they have a certain type. Okay? Can somebody name a type of request?
Get.
Get.
Save.
Sorry?
Save.
Save?
Save.
Post? Okay. Patch? Good. Yep. Patch is the bonus answer because we don't use patch that often. Actually, in Rails 4 we do. Put, patch, delete, get, post. Okay. And then standard URLs. Again, this is a mouthful. Let's look at it in a bit more detail. Like I said, we should be able to interact with these things in standard ways. Okay, we don't necessarily have to interact with them in all of these ways, but if we're going to interact with this product, it should only be in this way. And that goes for any RESTful resource. If you're interacting with tweets and comments or Facebook posts, okay, think about a Facebook post. You create Facebook posts. I don't know, I can't remember if Facebook allows you to update them. You may update a Facebook post. Okay, your followers read your Facebook posts, right? And if you really hate what you posted, you probably destroy a Facebook post. Question?
Sorry, by update, you mean also edit?
Yes. Yeah. Good question. Does update mean edit? Yes, basically. Okay. So when you talk about RESTful resources, these are the ways that you can interact with it. It makes sense. It's pretty much any. Like you probably wouldn't want to do anything else with it. Okay. Using standard HTTP protocols and URLs. Okay, a RESTful web resource follows this convention. Okay, now there's a lot to read here, so I'm going to walk you through it a little bit. Okay, walk you through it slowly. Okay, we said that a entity should be able to be interacted with in CRUD, right? Create, read, update, destroy. Okay, so the type of interaction here is listed on the left. So we have create actions, read actions, update actions, and destroy actions. You may be asking, why is there 2 creates, 2 reads, and 2 updates? Okay, that'll become very clear in the web world when we get to it, okay? But I can explain to you today, for example, read. Sometimes you may want to read a list of products. Sometimes you may want to read a single product, okay? So read actually in the HTTP RESTful world has 2 versions. An index, which is a list of all your products, or show, just a single product. Okay, so 2 ways to read a data entity. Okay, so these are the types of interactions that we should be able to execute on our data entity in a RESTful resource. Okay. Secondly, we give each one of these a unique name. Okay, so because create has 2 and read has 2, like we can't just call it read. We should give it a unique name. Okay. So the unique names we give these are in that second column. Okay. So for example, the index version of read we call index. Okay, so when you're returning a list of products, we call that the index action. If you're returning the individual product, we call that the show action. Again, we will get to why there's new and create and why there's edit and update. Okay. So this is the way you can interact with your entity. And again, this could be products, this could be users, this could be invoices, this could be students, classes, whatever. Okay, whatever your system is. Now, what they say is, if you follow standard RESTful web conventions, these are the requests that you're going to use to fulfill those interactions. Okay? So if I want to, for example, get a list of my products, I should be able to get that at the URL /products if I send a GET request. If I send a GET request to get/products/3, that should return to me the product with the ID 3. Okay, so that's how you read this table. So if I go to this URL and send it this type of request, that's the interaction I expect. Now, this is a convention, okay? There's nothing programmatically preventing you from flipping these all around if you want, okay? But then you're messing with conventions. When you integrate into APIs, okay, let's say you want to pull information from a Shopify store. Let's say you got a client who says, I have a Shopify store. Can I get those products listed on my personal website? You can, okay? And they code it like this. So their Shopify store / products will return a list of products. Their Shopify store / product / for will return the product with the ID 4. Okay, is it starting to make sense, this table? Okay. And then I just have a column here to give you an example of what it might actually look like. Okay. So / product / new will give you the new action. / products will give you the create action, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now remember, a request has a type and a URL. All right. So that's why some of these URLs look the same, right? If you look at create and index, they have the exact same URL, but they have a different type, and that's how we process them differently, right? When a request comes into our server and says get products, that's going to be handled differently than post products, for example. Okay. If you code your website to do this, you are creating a RESTful web resource. Okay. If you expose that to the outside world, you're creating a RESTful web service. Okay, that people can then query your site to get this information. Okay. So that's what a RESTful resource is. The goal programmatically in Rails to implement a RESTful resource is to code all these pieces. We code a controller, we code a model, and we code a bunch of view templates. Very similar to what we did with the pages controller. Okay? And they're located in the exact same places. All right? So if we were doing products, I keep using the product example, right? We would have a products controller. We would have a product model. And notice how I'm saying those, right? Products, plural. Product, model, singular, right? These are all the Rails conventions. And then we have a bunch of view templates which we'll be implementing. Okay? So the goal of Rails applications is to structure your application into as many RESTful resources as you can. Now, sometimes you won't be able to do that. I'll give you a perfect example. Our pages controller was not RESTful. We created actions called about and contact and home, right? Those actions don't exist in that table, right? You don't see contact, about, or home here, right? So the pages controller actually didn't follow the RESTful convention. And if you remember when I was teaching that lecture, I told you guys this is straying a little bit from the way Rails applications are typically done. And I'll tell you, the pages controller is the only, not the only, one of the many, it's a perfect example of something that I use over and over again that does not follow the Rails RESTful convention. But you should try as your goal to structure as much of your application into this as you can. And sometimes it's challenging. Sometimes I mean, it's pretty interesting. Like sometimes you think about like memberships, okay? Like how do you add a user to a class, okay? So like, sorry, I shouldn't use the word class because we're all programmers here. How do you add a user to a club, okay? There's a curling club and they want to join the curling club. And how would you model that? Okay, you may have a RESTful resource for clubs, okay? You may have a RESTful resource for users, but how do you join the two, okay? And so a common way to do that is you actually have a RESTful resource for membership. So you create a membership, you destroy a membership, you update a membership, things like that, okay? All the big shots who code web are always trying to structure as much as possible their apps into this kind of structure, the RESTful structure. So that should be your goal, right? Always think to yourself, how can I throw this into a resource that can be created, read, updated, and destroyed? That's how you should be thinking. Okay, so here's an example. This would be a good e-commerce store. They have users, they have products, they have purchases, and they also post some news every now and then. So I would create controllers for all of these. I'd create models for all of these. I would create views for all of these. And the only way you could access any of these is through create, read, update, and destroy using that HTTP table that I just showed you. Okay? Again, always think to yourself, that is your goal. If you can code a Rails application that only has this structure, you are well on your way to being a very, very good software engineer. Okay? And let me tell you, when you integrate with APIs that implement this, you're like, oh, sweet, I know exactly how this works. Okay? This is so nice. Like, once you subscribe to this and you're like, oh, yeah, does that, can you integrate with my legacy system that I have sitting in my back room? Like, okay. Does it use REST API? Yeah, it does. Oh, this is going to be amazing. It's going to be super easy to integrate with it. Because I know exactly what the REST API is getting back to me. I know that if I request slash products, it's going to give me a list of products, right? Things like that. Now, don't forget that we're structuring our app this way, okay, with controllers, models, and views. But the way the interaction happens in Rails is still our traditional Rails routing here. You're still going to the routes, you're still hitting the controller, you're still potentially interacting with the model, returning a view. That has not changed at all, okay? It's just we have a whole bunch of these now. We have a products controller, we have a invoices controller, so on and so forth. The RESTful resource that we're coding in this class is our blog post. We've already created a model for the blog post. Now we got to create all this infrastructure around it to be able to create it, update it, edit it, delete it, and so on and so forth. Okay? So this is our goal. This is what we're going to build over the next couple weeks. We want to be able to implement those 7 instructions. Okay? The 2 reads, the 2 creates, the 2 updates, and then the destroy. Okay? This is what we're implementing over the next couple weeks. This is a RESTful resource. Question?
Because in this table it says that the type of request put.
Oh, it's put instead of patch? Is that what it says?
I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
In the table it didn't say patch, so I was wondering what patch does.
Good question. Okay, so in Rails 3 and below, it was actually put. It was the put request instead of a patch request. Okay, so to be honest, in Rails 4, I think both are accepted. If you send a put request or a patch request, that'll still be interpreted basically as our update action. Okay.
So it just differentiates between the version?
No, like basically like in web, we actually have put and patch. They're both usable. Okay. Rails decided to adopt put for Rails like 3 and below as a way to say if you're going to do a put request, we consider that an update. And then in Rails 4, they said you can still use put, but we're phasing that out. We actually want to use patch instead. And the reason they made that switch is if you actually go and look at like the web, I can't remember what it is. I think it's like the Web Consortium's like formal definition of what a put should do and what a patch should do. Patch is more suitable for updates than put actually is.
Yeah, it's because Ruby on Rails was developing at the same time as the standard was. So they couldn't just sit there and wait for the standard. So they were implementing it this way. That was one of the ways that they did it.
Yeah. So that table is probably wrong, to be honest. It should say patch. Like just think going forward, we should be saying patch. But good catch. You're definitely listening. That's good. Or paying attention. Okay. So this is our goal over the next couple of weeks, is to implement these 7 ways through our website to interact with our blog post resource. Okay. Keep in mind, I'll keep going back to this every week. Today, we're focusing on the top 2. Today, we're going to implement the get index and the get show. Okay. Any questions? Okay, what is get index and what is get show? I basically said it already, but let's go over it one more time. The intent of get index, okay, is to return a list of what you're getting. Okay, so if you do get products, it should return a page that has a list of products. Again, this is convention. You can totally code it however you want. But what people are expecting is that if they don't go to get products, you're going to be returning a list of products. Okay? This is what the request looks like. It's a get request, and the path is slash the name of your resource. So slash products, slash invoices. Okay? And it does not carry any payload. We talked about that in the first lecture, that requests can actually carry some data with them. Okay? This particular request doesn't have any data that comes with it. Okay, it's an empty request to get slash products. Show. Show, the intent here is that you're returning a single instance of your data entity. Okay, so if you go to get slash product slash 5, you're returning a page that just shows that one product. Okay, It could be the product page that has all the details about the product, for example. Okay. So a very common example is like the index would be a full list of all your products. And then when you click on the product, it brings you to the product details page, which is the product show page. Okay? And this is how you'll be talking with other Rails developers. Oh, the index action, the index page, the show action, the show page. Oh, we're having an issue on the show page. Can you go fix that bug? All right? Oh, the index page is taking too long to load. Can you load that via Ajax? So on and so forth. Okay? Any question about what the intent of index and show is? Okay, that's the intent. We are going to follow Rails conventions. We are going to follow HTTP conventions, and we're going to return what the intent of these are. Okay? Coding exercise. Here we go. We're going to start with index. So make sure your Rails server is running. Make sure you can access the web page. Okay? Mine is not. For those of you who did do the homework, it'll look similar to mine with the home, about, and contact page. But don't worry, if you didn't do the homework and you don't have the about and contact, you should still at least have the home and your home page. Okay? So we have blog posts. We created a model for it. Now we want to implement a way to view those blog posts. Okay? So if we look at our table of requests, okay, we want to find a list of our blog posts. So what type of request are we sending for the index? Get. Good. Okay. So we want to send a get request. And what will the URL look like for our blog posts?
/blogs.
Close. What's the name of our actual model, though?
Oh, blog post.
Blog posts. So if we send a get request to /blog posts, the user is expecting that a list of blog posts come back. Okay? So let's code that route. So if we go to config, routes, okay, this is what our routes looks like so far. Okay, again, some of you will not have the about or the contact. Okay, so I'm just going to put a comment here. Okay, hashtag is for comment. I'm going to say this is going to be the blog post RESTful resource. All my routes that have to do with my blog post RESTful resource, I'm just going to put below this line, just so I can read it easier. Okay. All right, one more time. What's the type of request that we want? Get. And what's the URL? /blog post, right? Good. Okay. So it's going to be a get request. All right. And it's going to be to /blog posts. Okay, remember, almost everything in Rails is lowercase underscore, with the exception of classes. Right? /blog posts. Okay. Now we have to go tell it to process that somewhere. Again, we could process it in any way we want. We could send it to the pages controller for all we care. We could send it to anything we want. Okay. But let's follow the Rails convention. We're going to create a blog post controller, and we're going to name the action after that interaction table that we had. Okay. So we are going to send it to a certain controller and a certain action. Okay. It could be any controller you want. Again, we're going to follow Rails convention, and we're going to send it to the blog posts controller. Okay. And the action that we're going to send it to is index. Okay. Again, just follow that table. Again, if you're using double quotations, Sublime may automatically put some curly braces in there. Just get rid of those curly braces. Question?
I'm just wondering if I didn't do the exercise from last week.
Yes.
Like the coding exercise,
Did you create the Rails model, like the blog post model? Okay. You'll be able to type along, but you probably won't get the results that you want. Yeah. I can follow up with you after class, actually. you'll see at what point we use the model. So, yeah. Okay, now again, I want you to read this. Okay, I want you guys to get used to the reading this. Okay, it's always the type of request, the URL goes to a certain controller on a certain action. Okay. The reason I want you guys to get familiar with that is that, again, just because this is called blog post and that's called blog post doesn't mean these always have to match up, right? I mean, we kind of follow that convention a little bit, but it doesn't mean these have to be the same thing. We're just following some conventions here, but always remember, it's type of request, URL, controller, action, okay? So when you send get/blog post, goes to blog post controller and the index action. Okay. What happens after the routes file? Where does it go? Controller. So which controller in this case?
Create a new one.
Blog post controller, right? So let's go to our blog post controller. So app controllers. We don't have a blog post controller. Patrick beat me to the punch here. We got to create a blog post controller, okay? So just like we created a page controller, let's create a blog post controller, okay? So we don't use code generators in this case. It's simple enough to type it up ourselves. So right click, new file, okay, and save that file. Be very careful with Sublime. It's a little finicky. Make sure it's saving it in the right place. App/controllers, okay, and we're going to create blog posts controller. Plural, lowercase underscore. A lot of the errors I see when I help students is a lot of times it is just little simple things like it's not pluralized, it's not singular, so on and so forth, okay? So let's save that. So we have the blog post controller now under our controllers folder. So let's create the controller class. So class blog posts controller. And this extends a special class. Okay, all controllers extend a special class called the application controller. And then again, Ruby doesn't use curly braces, it uses start and end statements, so just class and then end. Okay, let's take a look at our routes file. What did our routes file say? Get/blog posts goes to the blog post controller, and what's the name of the action it's going to? Index, right? It's going to the index action. Okay, so let's go to our index action. And remember, actions are just methods inside the controller. So, do we have an index action? No. Let's create one. So def, okay, and index. And then you end it with end. Okay? This would be very similar to like public, void, index, curly brace, okay? Just a method definition. Okay. Okay, when a request comes into our server, it goes to the controller in action. What is the thing we have to do to adhere to HTTP protocol? What do we have to do at the end of all our actions?
Render.
Render. We always have to return a response. Okay, this is the agreement that we have in the HTTP world. If somebody sends us a request, we better give them a response back, okay? So let's give them a response. So let's call a render. Okay, and we're going to pass in the name of a view template. And the view template in this case, we're just going to call it the exact same as the action. Okay, it's easier to keep track of that way, okay? So we're going to call it index. So that render method says, go find the index template, process it, put it into the layout, and throw it back to the user, right? Okay, so the view template. Where is this view template found?
Views, pages.
Views, pages, very close. Okay, it definitely is in the views, definitely in the views.
Is it the layout?
It doesn't exist yet.
Doesn't exist yet, good. You can see my theme that I'm going with, right? Doesn't exist yet. The way that Rails searches for view templates is always in the views folder, so that's good, we're in the right place. but it always looks for it in a folder that's named after the controller. Okay? So what's this controller called? Blog post. So it's going to look for index in the blog post folder in the views folder. That's why we had the pages folder, right? Because we had a pages controller. So all those views are in the pages folder. So here we're in the blog post controller. So we're going to add a blog post folder underneath views. Okay? So underneath views, okay, we add a new folder called blog posts. Okay, again, lowercase underscore matches the controller name. Okay? If Sublime doesn't let you do that friendly, you can just do it in your Finder or your Windows Explorer. Just add a folder underneath app views called blog posts. So that's where it's looking for it. Now we actually need that template. Okay? Guess what? Doesn't exist. So let's add it. So let's add a new file, save it. I say this every time. Sublime is a little finicky. Just make sure it's saving it in the right place. And all of our view templates in Rails have an HTML extension and then an ERB extension. You are going to learn in about 10 minutes what ERB means. Don't know why I need to look at my watch for that. Just want to show off my watch. Okay. All right, we're doing pretty well. This is that whole Rails routing that we talked about, right? Start of the routes. So somebody types in /blog posts in the URL bar. Remember, URL bars are always GET requests, right? Anytime you type a URL in the URL bar, that's a GET request. So get blog posts. It'll hit the blog post controller index action. So it hit the blog post controller and hit the index action. So it's going to do any processing we need to process in here. And then when all that processing is done, we're going to render the index.html.erb. So remember, render does a whole bunch of things, but one of the things it does is take your HTML, which is currently blank, and puts it inside the layout and then spits it back to the user. Okay, so let's put some HTML in here so we can actually see if this is working. All right, so let's do h1, and let's just call it blog posts. So even if you don't have your model code, this part should work. Because we haven't done anything with model yet. This is actually very similar to what we've done with the pages controller and everything so far. Okay. Okay, so let's refresh the page, or not refresh the page. Let's go to our browser and go to that actual URL. So we're at localhost 3000 with our web server running. We just type /blog_posts. Enter. And that's what you should get. Okay. Blog posts. The site is looking pretty awesome, guys. Gotta say. Love my Times New Roman. Okay, great. How many people were able to get that up and running? Okay, not too bad. We're dropping off a little bit, but okay, blog posts. Okay, so up until now, you guys have not probably, but anybody who's done HTML probably is a little bit like, how is this any better than what I've been doing? You know, I'm just coding HTML and throwing it back to the client. But there's nothing actually happening that's any new than me just coding regular HTML, throwing it onto a server and serving it up. Right? Ooh, fancy, I can specify routes that go to a controller that do absolutely nothing anyways. They just serve the page back. Right? That's true. That's very true. Okay? Today is where all that changes. Today is the first time we use our programmatic skills to generate HTML for us. Okay? So here's how we do it. Generally in Rails, models are pretty much accessible anywhere. Okay? All the models that you coded and you played around with in Rails console, they're accessible pretty much anywhere, to be honest. All right? They're public classes. They're pretty much accessible anywhere. And one of the places they're accessible is inside the index, or sorry, inside the controllers. Okay? And any model. Okay? Just because I'm in the blog post controller doesn't mean I can only access the blog post model. I can actually access any model I code. Okay? So we are going to use our model. Now, somebody remind me in their own words what the intent of getIndex is.
Show a list of whatever you saved.
Exactly. Show a list of whatever you've got, right? And what are we dealing with in this case? Blog posts. So we should show a list of blog posts. That is our intent, all right? So let's grab all our blog posts from our database and show them on that web page. Okay, that's what we're going to do. So unlike Java, we don't have to declare variables. We can just set variables equal to a value the first time we use them. Okay, so we don't have to do var something equals whatever. Okay, so I'm going to define a variable here called blog posts. You can see where Ruby gets a little bit confusing. I mean, we have the word blog post like everywhere. And every time we look at it, it's a different thing. Like, for example, in routes, this is a URL. This is a controller. Okay, well, now here it's a variable, right? But that's why Ruby programmers are so smart. They can look at stuff like that and be like, yeah, no, that's a variable. That's a class. Oh, that's a route, and so on and so forth. And that's why they start to get snooty as well. So that's a variable. We could have called it whatever we wanted. Okay? If you don't like the word blog post, call it my variable. Call it whatever you want. Okay? Now we are going to use our model to actually get those blog posts. Okay? So we're going to use our model, which is a class. Okay? And we're going to call a method to retrieve all the records that exist in the database of blog posts. Does anybody know the name of that method? .all. Perfect. Now, .all, again, is a very magical method. It goes into the database, looks at the table, sees all the entries for blog posts. It reads all those entries in all those columns, instantiates blog post instances for each one of those rows, throws them all into an array, and returns it. So what we end up with in blog posts here is an array of blog post instances with values set by those database rows. Okay? Very magical method, actually. Again, in your database course, you will code a method very similar to this, probably called .read, okay, or .get or something like that, okay? So that's going to go to our database, the exact same database we interacted with Rails console. It's going to go into the database, grab those blog posts, instantiate them, throw them into here. Okay? So we got the blog posts in our controller. Wouldn't it be sweet if we could access that stuff in our HTML? Like, so we could output it in HTML, right? The way it stands right now, we cannot do that. Okay? Variables that you declare inside your methods in the controller they're not accessible in the view templates. Okay? We can make them accessible though. PHP users are probably used to this, okay? You're making variables accessible outside, okay? The way we do that is we declare instance variables on the controller. How many people here have coded an instance variable before? Okay? In Java, right, you create a class and you usually have like var name, var age, var whatever. Those are instance variables, right? And those variables are accessible from any method in the class, right? That's an instance variable. Instance variables are no different. If I were to declare it in one method, I could access it in another method. Okay? But in the Rails world, in controllers specifically, okay, the reason we use instance variables is because they're accessible in view templates. Okay? So how do we declare instance variables? In Java, you probably would have done something like this. Okay? And then you probably would have done something like or is it this in Java? Yeah, this.blog post, right? That's an instance variable, right? In Rails, or sorry, Ruby, to declare an instance variable, all you have to do is put the @ sign. You declare a variable with the @ sign, that is an instance variable. Now, I want to be very careful here, okay? Because what I said is when you declare an instance variable inside a method, it's accessible in any other method, just like instance variables are, right? Okay? I want to warn you that controllers don't really behave like regular objects. So because you declare something here, don't think it persists to the next action or the next action and so on and so forth. Okay? So this is a very, very special case of instance variables. Okay? And they're very special cases that we only do this so that this is accessible in the view. Okay? The reason I want to make that distinction is because if you do regular Ruby programming outside of Rails, like for example in the model or whatever, okay? You do regular Ruby programming, instance variables are just like the instance variables you guys know, okay? In this case, they act a little bit different, okay? So at blog posts, because we've done that, it is now accessible as an object in your HTML, in your view, okay? In the view that you're rendering. Whoops. But once we've done that, it should be accessible in that view. Okay, so let's actually do something with it then. So how do we access these instance variables in our HTML.erb view template? Question?
I just want to,
Yeah.
like the blog underscore posts now it's an array.
Yes, correct. To be 100% honest, it's something called an active relation, but for our intents and purposes, it's basically an array. So you can call things like size. You can access individual elements with the square brackets, like 0, 1, or whatever, right? Okay. But yeah, blogpost.all basically returns an array of instances. Okay, so why don't we somehow put that in here? Okay, now remember, HTML only understands HTML, right? And browsers only understand HTML and CSS and JavaScript, but they only understand client-side languages. They do not understand Ruby. So when I say that this blog post is accessible here, if I do something like this, okay, HTML is not going to understand that. HTML just reads that as like text that you're putting in there. Like if I were to save this and refresh my page, okay, yeah, the text just shows up there, right? At blog posts. Okay, that's part of the HTML. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, hold on here. We are going to let you know, Rails, we're going to let you know, we're going to insert some Ruby code into our HTML. And we want you to evaluate that code before you return this back to the user. Okay? We're going to embed some Ruby code in our HTML. We're going to embed Ruby code. Why am I saying this so creepily multiple times? ERB stands for embedded Ruby. Okay? HTML code with Ruby embedded all in between it. Okay? So let's embed some Ruby into our code here. Remember how I said that HTML does not do math? If I do 1 + 1, right? And I refresh the page, 1 + 1. HTML just treats it as regular text. It can't do arithmetic. But Ruby can. Okay? So let's test that out. Let's put some Ruby code in here. And the way we do that is we mark it with server-side tags. In other words, tags that contain server-side code. What is our server-side code? Is it Java? No. What is it? Ruby. We're using Ruby. Okay? So this is what a server-side tag looks like. It opens with, it kind of looks like HTML, like the less than sign, but then it has a %, and then it closes with a %. So anything you put in between there is going to be Ruby code. Okay? So let's try 1 + 1 in there. Okay? Refresh the page. All of a sudden, we can put any Ruby code we want in our HTML. Question?
So like similar commands we did in the Rails console would work in.
Exactly.
Okay.
All those commands that we were playing around with in the Rails console, we can actually put in here, as long as they're accessible objects. Okay? Now, 1 and 1 is just integers. They're available anyway, right? They're not objects, right? So that can happen. Okay? Now, what's cool is, again, you can scatter this into your HTML. Let's say we wanted that value to be the value for header 2, right? So if you went to Nell's course, you probably learned about second-level headers. Maybe? Yeah. H2, right? H2, right? So I could have H2/H2, and I could have something in here, right? So if I leave it like that, and I refresh the page, right, I get a little second header there called something in here. But let's say I want that to be some Ruby code in there. I just replace something in here with my server-side tags, okay, and just do like 1 + 1 + 1. Refresh the page, number 3 is there. So this is another magical thing that the render method does. The render method goes through your ERB code and says, evaluate all your Ruby code, okay, and put it, the evaluation of that Ruby code, put that in place of these server tags. So it's going to evaluate 1 + 1 + 1 is 3. So replace that whole bit with just the text 3. And you can see this on your browser. If you view your page source, okay, look, h23/h2. There's no remnants of those server-side tags. There's no 1 + 1 + 1, just a 3. This is the interesting thing about Web 2.0. You have no idea how that came to be as a user. If someone was visiting this website, you'd have no idea how that number 3 got there, right? This is the Ruby programming that's spitting that out, right? So it's kind of interesting. Okay, so this is what that render method spits out. Okay. Okay, cool. Let's do some actual stuff besides arithmetic. I am going to output the number of blog posts that are in my database. Okay, so I'm just going to put a placeholder for now. Say 5 blog posts. Okay, just to see how it looks while I'm styling my page and just to get an idea. Want to prototype it just to see how it looks. Refresh my page. Okay, 5 blog posts, looks pretty good. Now I want to replace that number with the actual number of blog posts that are in my database. So how do we do that? Replace the number 5 with server-side tags. Okay. Now we have an array that has all our blog posts in it, right? And it is an instance variable. So that instance variable is actually accessible here. Okay, so here's that array. And arrays have methods just like Java arrays do, and one of their methods is size. .size. Now remember, Ruby doesn't actually require brackets on your method calls. So I'm just going to get rid of those brackets to make it a little bit simpler. Okay. I actually can't remember how many blog posts I have in my database. This might be 0. We'll see. Okay. Refresh. 0. I have no blog posts in my database. Okay. So I'm going to add some blog posts to my database. Okay. So back in my SSH session, this SSH session is already taken up by my Rails server, so I don't really want to mess with that. So I'm just going to start a new SSH session. So just opening up a new terminal window. Okay. Vagrant SSH. So now I have one connection into my virtual box, and this is a second connection to my virtual box. Okay. Once I'm in there, now remember, Rails console is accessing the exact same database that my web code is, okay? So if I go to my website, okay, and I fire up Rails console, I'm going to add some data. I'm going to add some blog posts to that database, okay? Okay, so if I look at blogpost.all, right, it returns this empty array, right? There's nothing in there. So I'm going to add some more blog posts to that, okay? So I'm going to do a blog post equals blogpost.new. Okay, that's going to instantiate a new blog post. I'm going to set its title. equal to my first blog post. And then I'm going to set its body. This was a great day. Getting a little sweaty in my dress shirt. Okay? This is the kind of stuff people share. Okay? All right, and then I want to save that to the database. Blog post.save. Now that's in the database. So if I refresh my page, it should pick up that new entry, right? Okay, because again, it's that same database that my web code and my Rails console is accessing. So go back to my website, refresh. Boom, 1 blog post. Good grammar. Actually, Rails comes with code to actually pluralize a singular based on your number.
Oh, I thought you were gonna spell check.
No, that's spell check.
I go crazy.
Yeah. Okay. So you see now how I do not have to recode this template every time blog posts change. Now when people add more blog posts or delete blog posts, this will be live, right? So let's add another blog post in our terminal or console. So I'm going to create another blog post. So blog post new. I'm just going to use that same variable, just like in Java, right? You can use the same variable, let's override it, right? All right, let's give it a title as well. My second awesome blog post. Can't think about anything else after being sweaty in my dress shirt. My glasses are sliding off because of the sweat. Let's save that. Now that's saved to the database. I have 2 entries in there. Refresh the database, or refresh the web page. 2 blog posts. Okay, so you see how this works. Your data in your database is now driving the HTML that's output. Rather than a hired intern sitting at a desk and updating that HTML page every time somebody enters a new blog post, this is being done programmatically now. Okay, I for sure hope to God that doesn't actually happen. Okay, so that's kind of interesting, and the concept is interesting, but this is still a pretty useless website. We have blog posts. Why don't we show the blog posts? Okay, so let's continue down this route of using Ruby code to generate our HTML. Okay, so back here. Okay, I'm still going to keep this total. I kind of like this running total at the bottom. So when I have like 30 blog posts, I want to see a little running total at the bottom. It makes me feel good. Okay, so I'm going to keep that. Okay, but now what I want to do is I want to put out every blog post, and I want them formatted the same way. I want all their titles to be H2, okay, second level headers, and I want their bodies to be in paragraph tags. Okay, but again, we're not going to hire an intern to go look at the database and look at the title and look at the body and type that in here. Because if we did, this is what they would do. H2, okay, my first blog post, all right, paragraph, what was it, sweaty something, okay, and then they'd type another H2, all right, and then they would do my second awesome blog post, all right, the glasses sliding, they'd do something like that, right? This doesn't make any sense if you have millions of users with millions of blog posts. That intern is going to like lose their fingerprints, okay? This doesn't make a lot of sense. This is a good way to preview it. Why don't we save this and preview it? Okay. That looks pretty good. Okay, that's what I'm going after. Okay, I want my blog post to be listed here, but I don't want to hand code it. I want it to be driven by the database. Okay, so this is how we're going to do it. We are going to loop through the blog posts that we have and output something for each one of them. And this is where things get kind of cool. You're intermixing like Ruby and HTML code. So you're going to create a Ruby loop, but inside that Ruby loop, you're going to put HTML. Okay, so here we go. So I don't know if you guys remember from last time, but the way we do a Ruby loop, okay, looks like this. I'm going to bring up my console here, okay, and it kind of looks like this. So if I had blog posts, Sorry, that's probably pretty small for you guys. Okay, so let's say I got all the blog posts from my database. Okay. So I type this command in, grab them all from the database. You can see how Rails console becomes really handy, right? Because if you want to test out any code, you can test it here first. Okay, so I got all that there. Okay, so I have this here, blog post.size, okay. Outputs 2, right? That's great. Okay, so the way we loop over this is we do a dot each, and we do 2 pipes, and the name of the variable we want to represent with each instance in that loop. You can call this whatever you want, okay? But that's what the variable is going to be referred to once you're inside the loop, okay? So it kind of makes sense to call it blog post because you're looping over blog posts. So once you're inside the loop, you have a single blog post, right? Once I'm in here, I'm inside the loop. I could do things like output the blog post.title, for example, and hit end. Okay. And this is the output. Okay, so this is the loop up here. So I'm looping through. This is the body of the loop. Anytime I'm inside the loop, basically each instance is going to be assigned to this variable called blog post. So I have access to that blog post.title, and then it outputs that line, and then it outputs that one. Okay, so that's how we do loops on arrays. Has anybody here ever done a for each loop? Okay, it's very similar to that. Okay. Okay, so let's use that in our ERB. This is Ruby code, right? We can do that, right? Okay, so. All right, so let's create the loop. Now, this is Ruby code, so we have to put it into server-side tags. This is where syntax starts to look funky. Sorry, just so I don't confuse you yet. Okay, you can actually break up Ruby constructs in ERB. Okay, you can actually have your start of the statement in your server-side tags, and then your end of your statement in another server-side tag. Okay, and I'll show you why that's important. Because basically, what's going to happen is we want to output HTML in between that. Okay. Now there is one catch to this. Remember how I said server-side tags are less than %equals? Okay. That is only if you want the evaluated result of what's in between those tags to actually be put into your HTML document. Okay. So here we're building this HTML document, right? There's a header at the top, and down at the bottom we have this number of size blog posts. Whatever the value of this is, we want that in the HTML, right? As if we typed it into the HTML document, right? So that's why we have the equal sign there. But if statements, loops, switch statements, all these kind of constructs, right? The actual value of the construct itself, you don't want in your HTML document, okay? Like the actual starting of the if statement and end of the if statement, you don't want that in your actual HTML document. All the stuff in between you do, but not these. So if you want to just evaluate a Ruby statement, but not actually have input to your HTML document, you take out the equal signs. If that didn't make sense, the take-home message is all constructs, if statements, for loops, switch statements, anything like that, okay? If else, all that, you don't put the equal sign. Otherwise, put the equal sign.
The second pipe is supposed to be there or not?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Good question. Okay. So now I have a loop here. We have 2 blog posts, so this is going to happen twice. Okay. Now watch, I can put some HTML in between. I'm just going to tab in because I like to indent my stuff properly. So I'm just going to put a paragraph here. Look at me. So if this works, we are looping over the blog posts, and each iteration, we're going to output this paragraph, look at me, to the document. Okay? Refresh the page. look at me, look at me. If we had 100 posts, it'd be look at me 100 times. Intern's job's getting a lot easier. Okay? So we've proven that the loop works. And this will work for if statements, by the way. You have if, else, and. It'll only put whatever is true in between that if and else, okay? So if you were to do an if, else, and, don't copy this yet. I'm just kind of showing you as a sample. You would have something like this, you know, if 5 is greater than 10, else, and, okay? You would have stuff here and stuff here as well. And it'll only output one of those to the document. Okay? So this is how we can intermix Ruby code with HTML code, okay? This is why they're called templates, okay? Because they're kind of like you're filling in a template, right? You have all your HTML that lays out the headers and the paragraphs and all stuff like that, and then you're filling in individual pieces, right, with data. Okay, so again, not very interesting to say look at me twice. Let's actually put some data out there, okay? So every blog post, I want to have a second level header, okay? Now we want to put the title of the blog post, okay? So we're inside the loop, but we have access to this variable called blog post, right? What am I missing here? Sorry? Yeah, server-side tags, right? Because HTML can't understand that, right? Well, it can, but I'll put it as blog_post, right? So this is a Ruby object, so we have to surround it. Now we do actually want this to be put into the document, right? We want the title to be in the HTML when we read it. Okay, and then we just want to access the title. Question? Do you need the @ sign? Very good question. Do we need the @ sign or not? Okay, so the only variable we actually set up in our controller was the @blog posts, right? That was the instance variable that we set up. So that's what we set up here, right? So we can access that variable. Now, this variable, okay, is just hung off that, right? This is like the variable that we're calling from that loop, right? And then this is what we're accessing here. So yeah, if we were doing something on the actual collection, then yeah, we would need that. So just like here. But this variable actually comes from somewhere else, right? Okay. You had me questioning myself, to be honest. I was like, yeah, no way, okay. Okay, so let's see how that looks. Here we go. Okay, and this updates in real time, right? Like if I go to my Rails console, okay, and I create another blog post, give it a title. Terrible titles. Give it a body. Hey, here, and then save that. Okay, refresh the page. There it is. And you see how our code is building our page for us, right? All right, so we have those. Let's put the body in there as well, right? It's not enough just to have the header. Let's put the body in there as well. Okay. So underneath the header, we're going to put paragraph tags. Okay, and then we'll put the body. Okay, I got to move along because we only have 15 minutes left. Okay, so this is the power of Web 2.0. PHP has something very similar, JSP very similar, C# very similar. You're using the server-side code to generate your HTML, okay? But all that gets thrown back to the browser is just that HTML, okay? If I look at the browser again, okay, and I look at the source code that came back here, you'll see there's nothing about that loop in here, right? It's as if somebody manually typed it, okay? Okay, that is index. Wait, I didn't refresh this page yet. There we go. Body's in there. Okay? This is how Facebook's created. This is how Gmail's created. Okay? You put a post up on Facebook. When somebody goes to that page, it goes and fetches all those posts and displays them on your wall. Okay? That's the index. Follow the exact same thing. Remember, started at the routes. When somebody types in get/blog post in the URL, goes to the blog post controller, goes to the index action. We set up an instance variable because we know we're going to use that data in the view. Okay? Then we render the index page, so it comes to here. Then we use that instance variable to create some HTML for us. Okay? We're going to do the exact same thing for the show action. Okay, so let's move on to the show action. So, does anybody remember what type of request show is? Get, perfect. In general, anytime you're just reading data, you should be using get requests, okay? So, it's gonna look like this, /blog posts, okay? /, for the first time, you guys are now being introduced to dynamic routes. In other words, variables inside the route, okay? And the variable we're gonna put here is called ID. The way you define a variable inside the route is with a colon. So that means anybody who types /blog post /something else, it'll match to that route. Could be anything. Could be a number, could be a string, could be anything. Okay? And this is going to go to the show action. Blog post controller, show action. Okay, what's the next step? Controller, awesome. Once we're in the control action. So create a new method called show. Okay. What's the very last thing we have to do in any action? Render, right? So let's render show. And then we got to create that view, right? So under blog post folder, under views, create a new file. Save it as, whoops, that was wrong. Okay, sorry. Save it as show.html.erb. Okay. And here we're gonna just put some placeholder text for now. So we'll call it the show page to make sure it's working. Okay. So if you go to your browser and you type /blog post /anything, okay, should match to the show page. Okay. Now, we're not going to expect people to type anything. We're going to expect people are typing IDs of specific blog posts. Okay? So, we expect them to type in things like /blog post /3 or /blog post /4, /blog post and so on and so forth. Okay? So, we need to find a blog post that we actually know the ID of. So, I'm just going to go to my Rails console here. Take a look at any of my blog posts. So, if I do blog post all, okay, there's a bunch in here. I have one that has an ID of 2. Okay, I have one that has an ID of 3. I have one that has an ID of 4. Okay, I'm gonna pick any one of those, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, I'm gonna use number 2. So when someone types in /blog post /2, I want it to show up here, just that blog post. Okay, so let's find that blog post and load it up. So let's go back to the controller. So we're going to load up a blog post. Okay? So I'm going to call that variable just blog post. And the method I'm going to use is blog post.find and pass in an ID. Now I've hard coded an ID here. I'll show you how we get that dynamic part of the route in a second. Okay? But I've hard coded an ID here. Okay. Just so for my tests. Okay. Okay, then I want to use this in the view. There's one thing I'm missing if I want to use this in the view.
At
at. This is not an instance variable yet, so I can't actually use that in the view. So let's make it an instance variable, okay? So at. So you start to get the pattern now. For controllers, controller actions set up the data that you need to use in the view, okay? So any complex fetching and calculation stuff should all happen in that controller. And then you just send the results to the view, okay? So now I have at blog post. So let's go to the show page. And instead of show page here, I am going to put the title of the blog post that I have. I'm going to put the body inside it. Now, in this case, we do need that at sign, right? Because we are referencing that actual blog post in this case. Okay. Now, again, if you guys have hard coded the ID, it might not actually work on your computers. You need to find that blog post that has that specific ID. Okay. So if I refresh my page, okay, there it is. Okay. Now we're kind of showing the same information we're showing on the index page, but you could imagine in the future we'd build out the comments section here and any more details about that blog post, right? The created at date, the updated date, stuff like that, right? This would be the more detailed view of that blog post. Okay, now I've hard coded it. The last thing I want to do is actually access that dynamic. Yes, question.
Yeah, is there a reason why you create an instance variable and then access it within the URB file rather than just executing a lot of Ruby code in the...
Oh, rather than doing it in the ERB file directly? Yeah, good question. Is there a reason we accessed, like created the instance variable inside the controller action rather than just doing a blog post.find directly in the ERB file? Programmatically, no reason. You can actually do that. You could have just as easily, in this page here, you could have done code that looks something like this, like blog post.find2.title. Could have done that. But good programming practices, the view is just presenting information, right? So any complex calculations, any interactions with the database, we typically want to do that in the controller, set up all the data we need, and simply present that in the view. So that's why we typically do it in the controller and just present it in the view, okay? But yeah, programmatically, nothing's stopping you from doing that. Okay, so that's that. How do we access that dynamic ID? 8 minutes. Okay, I'm going to show you how to access it first and then see if I have time to explain how that actually works, okay? So I'm going to have to explain it. Okay, so any dynamic part of a URL, so any part of a URL that you specify with this little colon, okay, that's again called the dynamic part of the route. Okay, any dynamic part of the route, okay, will always come into that controller action, okay, in a big collection called the params hash or parameters hash, okay? How many people here know what a dictionary or a hash map is? Okay, I really didn't understand that concept until I graduated, okay? So if you understand that, that's good, okay? So what happens is Ruby on Rails puts any dynamic part you have in the route and puts them all into a collection for you, okay? Called the params hash, okay? And then you can access that params hash in your controller action, okay? So what I'm saying is basically whatever the person types in here goes into this params hash, and then you can access that params hash to get that value out. Okay, that's basically how it's working, okay? So there is a variable in every one of these controller actions called params that you can access, okay? So I'm just going to create a variable here called blog post ID. There is a hash called params that we can access, params, okay? And for those who don't really understand hash maps, think of it this way. You guys know what arrays are, right? How many people here know what an array is? Okay, an array is a number-based collection. So you say array 0, you get a value back, right? Array 1, you get a value back, right? Array 5, you get a value back. That's what arrays are. Hash maps are very similar, except rather than using numbers, they can use anything. They can use strings, they can use objects, they can use whatever. So you can say hash map my name is a value. Hash map, my age is a value, and so on and so forth. That's what a hash map is, okay? So it's very similar to an array. So here we have params, very similar to an array. And rather than putting a number in here, like 0, 1, or 2, or 3, or whatever, okay, we put the dynamic part of the route that we're trying to access. Hold an ID. The small little aside is that colon ID is what we call a symbol. Don't worry too much about it. Okay, so now this is coming dynamic route. Any part of the dynamic route you created, if you did like / my little variable, okay, you could access params my little variable in there. Whatever you called it in the route, it's going to come in the params hash. Question?
Sorry, sorry. So is this blog post ID an integer?
Yes. No, sorry. It's whatever the person types after that slash.
Oh, okay, so
It could be a string, it could be a number, it could be whatever, right?
okay, so Python can take it.
It could take whatever, yeah, whatever it is. Generally, it's interpreted as a string, and then methods that use it may further interpret it. Generally, it comes in as a string, though. Okay. So now let's use that blog post ID. Rather than using the hard code number 2, just do blog post ID. Now we're programmers here. We can refactor. Why are we creating all these extra variables in place? So rather than creating this extra variable blog post ID, I'm just going to throw params ID directly into that. Okay. So let's just copy and paste this right into there. We don't need to create that extra variable. We are Ruby programmers. Why do we have brackets? Who needs brackets? Let's get rid of those brackets as well. Okay. So blog post.find params ID. It's going to return an instance of the blog post, assigned to the blog post instance variable, which then gets accessible here, and then we output it right there. Okay. So let's check it out. Blog post 2 returns exactly what my hard-coded blog post 2 did. If I switch it to blog post 3, boom, it's there. Now, I doubt anybody who's a user knows IDs of database entries. I doubt when you go to view your friend's Facebook page, you're not saying, oh yeah, you know what? That guy's ID is 568443296, right? So this is kind of useless. Like who's typing in these things, right? It doesn't really make sense. So why don't we help the user out by giving them a link to these pages, okay? So why don't we link from the index page to this page? Makes a little bit more sense, right? So let's go to the index page. For every blog post, we're going to put a little link underneath it, okay? So we're just going to code a little link in here. Destination right now, I'm just going to put an empty destination just so we see how it looks first before we actually code that destination in there. And then we're going to just say, view details or whatever, or view full post, how about? Okay. So there's that new piece of code there. Okay. So let's see how that looks. Let's go back to the index page. Okay, so that's pretty nice. We've got 3 view full posts. I don't like how 3 blog posts though is on the same line as the one above it. Just going to put that in a paragraph itself. Okay. So just put paragraph tags around the number of blog posts. Okay, it's looking pretty good. Okay, now we want those view full posts to actually go to /blog post /ID, right? So the destination for this link /blog posts /some ID. We don't know what that ID is yet, but we need that ID somewhere, right? So just like we got the title, just like we got the body, we are going to put the ID right in there. Okay. Now, is that Ruby code or is that HTML code?
Ruby.
Ruby. So we need server-side tags. And we actually do want the output of that to be in our HTML document, right? We want it to sit right there. So we want server-side tags with the equal sign. Okay. So less than, % equals, % greater than. This is why I recommend you type the HTML first. Because then you won't forget certain quotations, you won't forget certain escapes and stuff like that, okay? Like type your HTML first to see how your page is gonna look, then insert dynamic stuff inside it, okay? So that's why this quotation, remember, is matching this quotation over here, right? So inside there, we're just gonna put the blog post ID, blog post.id, okay? So this is what it looks like. Okay, almost done, guys, almost done. Okay, let's see if that works. So save that. Go back to your page. Okay, now when you hover on these links, you should see at the bottom left there, / blog post /2, blog post /3, and you click on them, goes to the actual page. Okay? Because links are also GET requests. Typing in URLs GET requests, clicking on a link is going that. Pretty good, but it's kind of annoying to go back. So let's just create a quick backlink from the show page back to the index page. Okay? So on the show page, we have the title and the body. Let's just create a link. Okay? So A/A, href / blog posts, back to blog posts. And that's okay, actually, that should be fine. Okay, now let's refresh our page. Get back to blog posts. So you can go to blog post 1, back to the index. Blog post 2 has become a pretty good user experience now. Absolute last thing we want to do. Let's put a link to our blog posts in our actual layout. Okay, because they'll probably come to our page and they'll land on the home page. They'll get to this. Oh, shoot, how do I get to the blog post page, right? Let's create a link to the actual blog post in our layout. Okay, so back to our layout, which exists under views, layouts, application.html.erb. Here was our navigation. We have a home, about, and contact. Most of you might just have home. Okay, so I'm just going to put it after home, actually. You can put it wherever you want. / blog posts. And blog post doesn't sound that great, so I'm just going to call it blog. Refresh your page. That should appear on every page now. You have the blog link now. So you can go to the blog. You can view your posts. You can go back to the blog post page, and so on and so forth. That is it. Okay? Pretty cool, right? This is like dynamic web programming. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to show you how to create a form where you can create blog posts, create a form where you can edit blog posts, create a delete button to delete blog posts, all from the website. Okay, and then you understand how Facebook works, how Gmail works, how Spotify works, how all these apps work. Okay, you have the power to do that. Okay, your homework, if you guys are up for it, is to basically on the index show a truncated version of the body. You're gonna have to look up Google some Ruby code, okay? Because the body for a typical blog post is not this, right? It's typically like, a couple hundred words, right? So I want you to show only like 100 characters in the index, and then when you click View Blog Post, it shows the full thing. Question?
How can you put the date?
How can you put the date?
Yeah.
Good question. So Ruby on Rails, by standard, every model you create has 3 fields that it automatically creates, even if you specify it or not. ID, created at, and updated at. Okay? They're fields just like title and body. Okay? Updated _ at and created _ at. Okay? I'll leave it to you to figure out how to actually incorporate them into it. Does that make sense? Okay. Cool. Any other questions? Very cool stuff, guys. Okay, I'm going to be around for a little while if anybody's having trouble getting their systems running, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you,
Okay,
Casey.
thanks, guys.
That's why you